Hey guys, Opie here. Welcome to my garden. Hey, today I want to talk about maybe some of the pros and some of the cons of straw bale gardening, especially if you're on the fence right now about whether or not you want to try this unique gardening technique. Today I want to talk about maybe a lesser known gardening technique known as straw bale gardening. It's really starting to gain traction over the last 10 years or so, especially since Joel Karsten released his book, Straw Bale Gardens. Since then, the whole idea has just kind of blown up, and you're really starting to see it a lot across the internet and in gardens all across the world. So I just want to discuss a few of the pros and perhaps some of the cons to straw bale gardening, maybe help you decide whether or not you want to try this technique. Now, I started straw bale gardening about 5 years ago when I moved to Brew City, Milwaukee. When I relocated here for work, I rented a home, and I didn't want to tear up the yard. I've been gardening for years and I really had to have a garden, but I didn't want to tear up the owner's property. So after doing a little bit of research, I found out about straw bale gardening, and I thought, you know, that's a really interesting idea. I wonder if that actually works. So I sought out some straw bales, and I think I started with like 20 bales. I kind of dived in head first because I just had to have a garden, and I was just praying and hoping that it worked as well as what I had seen other gardeners doing on YouTube and across the internet. And much to my surprise, my first foray into straw bale gardening was maybe the most successful garden I've ever had. And I've been hooked ever since. So what are some of the pros to straw bale gardening? Well, one, typically it's a fairly cheap way to garden. And that kind of depends on where you live and maybe sometimes who you know. So depending on where you're at, the price is going to vary quite a bit. It pays to do your homework because chances are you can actually access bales fairly cheap. You just got to look for them. So why else would you want to straw bale garden? Well, just like I said, perhaps you're renting a property and you're really not allowed to disturb the property or dig up the lawn. You know, that's where straw bales really fit the bill. You can throw your bales on top of the lawn, and at worst, there's going to be a bare patch of grass when you're done. That's easily remedied with a handful of grass seed. You know, the straw bale garden technique is also excellent for those with limited mobility. Perhaps you're getting up there in age, you've got back problems, or perhaps you're wheelchair bound. Essentially, you can set up your straw bale garden anywhere you want, and you're able to plant and pull weeds and harvest from a sitting or a kneeling position. So you don't constantly have to be bending over. There's no shoveling involved. There's really not much heavy lifting besides just getting your bales in place. And of course, if you get a helper with that, that's not going to be an issue at all. You know what might be my favorite thing about using straw bales is the fact that I don't have to pull weeds anymore. You know, for years I gardened the traditional style in ground, and I can't count how many hours I spent in the garden just pulling weeds. And now that I'm using straw bales, essentially I don't spend any time at all. I don't have to worry about pulling weeds. Another great thing about using the bales is the fact that I don't have to worry about disease. So the disease doesn't carry over from year to year because I'm using fresh bales every single year. So issues like blight and powdery mildew and some insect pressure has almost been eliminated completely because I'm using fresh virgin soil every year in the form of straw bales. And another great benefit of using bales is essentially you can set up a garden anywhere. You can put it in your driveway. You can put it on your deck, anywhere that gets a little bit of sun during the daytime. So you don't have to have a dedicated yard or other area for your garden. Essentially, whatever room you have, you can just throw a few bales down and start a garden right there. So what are some of the cons to straw bale gardening? Well, I gotta admit, I'm a little bit biased, so I don't really see a whole lot of cons involved in the straw bale gardening method. If there were any, I would say it would be availability of getting straw. But again, I have addressed that before, and you can check out one of my videos. to help you find straw bales if you're not quite sure where to look. A lot of people say that the fact that they can only use their bales for 1 year is a con. However, that's kind of half true. Yes, I will use fresh bales every year, but the spent bales from last year certainly don't go to waste. That broken down material makes an outstanding amendment to put in my flower beds, in my landscaping, and personally I use my spent bales to put in an in-ground garden, and it's probably the most fertile garden I've ever used. So to say that I only get 1 year out of my straw bales, that's not the case. Another one of the cons that I hear about often are the fact that the bales can become somewhat unstable throughout the year, of which there is some truth to that, but actually it's pretty easily remedied with some staking and perhaps some additional supports. I see plenty of straw bale gardeners, especially on YouTube, that are so dedicated to using straw bales that they actually build wooden structures or other support type of structures to actually place their bales in, which kind of holds everything in place. I don't do that because honestly I don't even really feel the need to do that. I've never had that much issue with my bales becoming unstable. With the trellis supports that I have installed, it's really not an issue. And of course, probably the biggest concern that I hear about involving straw bale gardening would be contaminated straw. This is an issue. However, I think it might be a little bit overblown, and it really pays to know where your straw is coming from. So do be sure to talk to your supplier and ask them, has there been any chemicals sprayed on these? Were there any pesticides or herbicides used on these bales? Most farmers will be forthcoming about it. These farmers know that their straw is going to be used in their own communities. It's going to be used by themselves. And, sometimes farmers get a bad rap, but I do believe that safety is one of their main concerns. And chances are, if there was anything sprayed on your bales, they're going to tell you about it. Now, if you're not entirely sure where your bales came from, you can perform a small bioassay on your bales, where essentially you just take a handful of straw, you chop it up very fine, mix it into some seedling mix, and plant a variety of seeds in that mix. If those seeds grow and they thrive, then your bales are clean. In my 5 years of straw bale gardening, I've not had one issue with my plants not thriving. And some people have some concerns that perhaps bale gardening requires more irrigation, more watering. To be honest, I haven't really noticed that. That has not been a problem for me whatsoever. I set up an automatic drip irrigation system across my bales, and they water for just a couple minutes every day. Anytime I reach my hand into those bales, they are wet. I mean, they hold water very, very well. So I'm not entirely sure where this is coming from. I suppose if you live in a very dry climate, maybe water could certainly be an issue. I can see where that would be a factor. But I would think in the typical garden, watering your straw bales is not going to be an issue. I don't use any more water in my bales than I would have used in a traditional garden. Now, personally, for me, one of the biggest questions I get when I mention straw bale gardening is, does it really work? And how? How does that work? And essentially, that's why I started the Brew City Gardener channel to begin with. I got asked that question so many times, I just had to start documenting the successes that I have. Now, there's a couple of very important things that you have to remember about straw bale gardening. The most important would be conditioning your bales. You absolutely have to condition your bales. And I'll explain to you how that works. So essentially, the straw itself is nothing more than a dried carbon-based plant matter. So really, there's little to no nutritional value in this straw the way it sits right now. If you were to just get this bale wet and throw some plants in it, those plants would die in short order because there's no nutrients there for the plants to take up. However, through the conditioning process, what we'll do is we'll add water and nitrogen to this dried carbon source. And if you know anything about composting, you know that a green source the nitrogen, and a brown source, the carbon, when mixed together and given hydration, starts the composting process. The same thing happens in the bales. So basically all the microbes that live inside these bales, the bacteria, the fungi, and other microbes that live inside these bales, when you add nitrogen, they will start to feed on that nitrogen, and they'll reproduce, and they'll start to break down that carbon. And what's going to happen is the straw breaks down and releases those micronutrients that then become readily available for your plants to use. So essentially, through the conditioning process, you're creating a brand new virgin soil, and I'm telling you, your plants are gonna thrive. They are absolutely gonna love it. Now, do be sure to keep up with the Brew City Gardener channel. Hit that subscribe button down there so you can follow along. I'm gonna show you how to condition your bales and the outstanding success that I get throughout the season. You don't wanna miss it. So as you can see, I'm absolutely a huge proponent of the straw bale gardening technique, only because it works so well. I mean, it is awesome. And that's why I try to encourage everybody to at least give it a try. Now, obviously, I'd like you to keep up with my channel, but I'm also going to leave some links below to some helpful information that may help you out in your straw bale gardening journey. So be sure to check those out as well. Hey, if you've got any questions or concerns about straw bale gardening, hey, feel free to leave a question or a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to answer. Or if you would like to hear from the straw bale gardening community as a whole, you can check out our Facebook group, the Global Straw Bale Gardeners Collective. We've got straw bale gardeners from across the whole planet that come together and share their gardens and their experiences. It's a great wealth of information. You got to check it out. All right, guys, I really hope you give straw bale gardening a try for yourself, and let us know how it works for you. I really want to see your garden and the successes that you have. All right, guys, go get your bales. It's time to get started. We'll see you.